Very well, thank you. You had a really interesting column the other day in St. Louis. The revolving door goes from City Hall to Lambert. For those who did not see it, explain a little bit about what this column was about.
Well, one of the very hugely important stories that's going on right now that I think is not getting enough coverage is the potential plan to privatize St. Louis Lambert International Airport. And it is a plan that hatched under Mayor Francis Slay and is being run by Rex Sinquefield's organization, the lobbying organization that works for him, Pelopidas, and a nonprofit organization that they set up that's connected to them. It's all part of Rex Inc., called Grow Missouri. And the questions that I've been raising in my column, this is my second column on the topic, is whether or not it is good for taxpayers that a private, non-transparent organization is running the process, the early part of the process, to determine whether or not this city ends up selling off, in effect, privatizing its greatest asset. And there is a process that is going to be set up in which these massive international companies are going to come in and bid on the right to basically operate that airport and pay the city a fee, a rather large fee to operate and frankly profit from our asset, from our airport. And right now it's all being done almost completely in secret with no transparency. And what Monday's column was about is the fact that this is an example of the revolving door that taxpayers really are disgusted by in a lot of ways in government, because one of the key lobbyists for one of the organizations that is now going to bid is Jeff Rainford, the former chief of staff of Francis Slay. He was the chief of staff when the discussion started on the possibility of privatizing the airport, and he admits that. He says, I was there, we were talking about it, we never did anything. So he says it's fine that he's working on it now. And then his most recent chief of staff, Mary Ellen Ponder, who was the chief of staff when he signed the deal for Pelopidas to start this ball rolling, now works for Pelopidas and may or may not be involved in the airport process, and says she doesn't particularly see a problem with it. Well, state law has a conflict of interest provision that my reading of it has a problem with both Rainford and Ponder being involved, because it was something that they were involved in their professional life. And the whole purpose of the conflict of interest statute is so that elected officials and their appointed representatives don't end up profiting off of their public work, so that we know while they're in the public eye doing the public's work, they're representing taxpayers, not setting themselves up for a big payday.
You know, this is like peeling an onion in a roundabout way, and you've got there's one angle on this that you're working on, but there's another one. It may have actually been in your first column or somewhere else in the paper. Is this actually a good deal? Because as I understand it, there's one other airport that this is where basically a private entity is operating the airport or has been allowed to operate the airport. I just don't see the benefit of this, because yes, we're going to get a chunk of money up front, which isn't necessarily going to go to the airport. That's money's, the taxes that are paid, the money's not going to go to the airport. It's going to go elsewhere within the city's budget. I don't know that that's a good financial rule,
Well, here's the problem that I have. It may be a good deal. I don't know. I don't know what, how many companies are going to bid. There's at least two big companies right now that have Missouri lobbyists. I would assume there's going to be more, and there may well be more, and I don't know their names, and so I haven't been able to figure them out yet. But there's two right now. Oak Tree Capital out of, they're all over the place. They're based in L.A., but their address in terms of hiring Rainford as a lobbyist is New York. And then there's Macquarie Capital, which is based out of Australia. The only airport in the jurisdiction that has done this is Puerto Rico.
That's it. That's right.
A territory that is in bankruptcy and filed bankruptcy after they did the privatization, and had well-documented conflict of interest problems similar to what I'm talking about and worried about here in St. Louis. So it's only happened one place, and there is nowhere near enough evidence to determine if it's actually been successful in that one place. Again, we're talking about Puerto Rico, and they're in the middle of a bankruptcy. So there's no way you can point to Puerto Rico and say, oh, it was a great success. It worked. It was great. Look at all the problems that it solved in Puerto Rico. There's no example that anybody can point to say, this is a great deal. And the problem is we don't have enough transparency right now where even if somebody presents a great deal, to really be able to make the judgment as elected officials and taxpayers that says it's a great deal, how much is going to go back to Pelopidas at some point? Mm-hmm. One of the things I reported in my first column on this, when the Mayor Slay presented it, he said this isn't going to cost taxpayers anything. Well, that's not what the contract says. What the contract says is that Pelopidas has an opportunity in the end to recover its costs. Well, we have no idea what those costs are right now. And we have no guarantee from anybody that we're ever going to know what those costs are. And so, you know, they paid for Mayor Slay to fly to Washington, D.C. to file the application. They told Travis Brown from Pelopidas told reporters that they've already spent at least six figures. We have no idea what they're spending and what they're spending it on and what conversations they're having with the potential companies that are coming in and whether those conversations give one company an insider edge because of who's representing them, i.e. the guy that started the ball rolling on this project.
Well, here's another question. Here's another question, Tony, that comes up at the same time. Is there any noise out of either the council in the city or out of Jefferson City, especially given the fact that we have a governor who has I don't want to call it a slush fund because that's not really what it is, but he's got a lot of dark money and nobody seems to know who's running the show. Is there any interest down Jefferson City way or in the city to try and enforce the rules and say, look, you guys can't do this, or at least the way you're doing it?
I have heard almost nothing out of the Board of Aldermen, and that's problematic. I've seen a couple of aldermen retweet my column and say, boy, this doesn't look good. But there's no hearing scheduled yet. There's nothing to schedule yet because nobody on the Board of Aldermen knows what's going on. The mayor, and I don't know that the new mayor does yet, but Mayor Cruzen hasn't put anything on the agenda. Louis Reed hasn't put anything on the agenda. We don't know what the next step is because the next step is being run in secret by a private organization that has no transparency to the public.
Is there a timetable on this at all? Is there a timetable on any of this as to how this process, how quickly or how long it's going to drag out for these organizations? I'm assuming you say you got at least two major corporations who are interested in potentially bidding and are setting up lobbying. I guess we have to wait and find out how many companies really want to do this, eh?
Right. And we have to wait for there to be some process. The next appropriate step would be for the city to announce, here's the company that we're going to rely on to give us advice in deciding how we run this auction. Just for lack of a better word, they're going to auction off the assets of Lambert. And so they've got to decide who's going to help advise them because there's nobody in the city that can help do it, that has that sort of expertise. So at some point, the city has to hire somebody to do that. And I would guess that's the next step. And I would also guess that that's got to happen in the next few months or this thing just goes away. The problem is you got to pay those people. And so there becomes this ongoing question, well, is Rex Sinfeld going to pay those people on behalf of the city? And is that a good thing? You know, the folks that are in favor of this, and again, I give them the benefit of the doubt. There may be a proposal to privatize the airport that makes sense for the city if indeed it helps shore up our policing and our neighborhood development and somehow convinces me that we're going to improve the airport at the same time. But to be able to make that argument, I think it's disingenuous to say, well, it's good that somebody else is paying the freight on this. Because the problem with that is, as we all know in politics, when somebody else is paying the freight, somebody else always wants something or gets something.
Isn't that the truth?
And we have to be able to see what that is to be able to make a fair judgment. And that's what's going on in Jeff City with, I think you called it what it is, with Governor Greitens' slush fund. That's what's going on there with all the dark money. If taxpayers can't see who's actually paying the freight and influencing government behind the scenes, then bad things happen. And that's my biggest concern. If somebody's going to make the argument that airport privatization is a good thing, then do so in the light of day.
Very good. Tony, we got to scoot, but thanks so much for the time this morning.
Hey, good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you as well. Tony Messenger, St. Louis Post-Dispatch columnist, joining us here on the Big 550.